I have a problem. I need your help. When I was in the 4th grade, I had a brilliant idea. At the time, I could barely speak through my hyperactive, anxiety-induced stutter. But I was determined to tell my mom about it, and she made me tell my dad and my Aunt Dale. Maybe I was bummed out with having to do chores or going to school, but I had decided that I wasn't going to get upset about that stuff anymore. I said, all that matters is having a good attitude. Thus began my optimism-biased journey, my lifelong refusal to accept reality, and my determination to see the world simultaneously as better and worse than it actually was. Today, I hope to impress upon you the spiritual consequences of our attitudes over the next few months, and I also hope to remind you of a way forward in building our beloved community. But first, a bit of fun. Lifeisnowhere. How do you read it?
Life I snow here.
Life is nowhere? Or life is now here? Life is how you perceive it. I could cite hundreds of examples and dozens of studies on this topic. But how you perceive it is influenced by emotional states, life experience, biases, your unconscious. Whether you missed your morning coffee this morning. It's your attitude towards life that defines it for you. And that's why they say, attitude is everything. Before we go on, let's get a few concepts straight. An attitude is a mental posture, a settled way of thinking or feeling that affects your behavior. But perspective is a point of view, the lens with which you see the world, and it affects how you view yourself and everybody else. That's not to be confused with having an opinion. It is very important to note the difference. Let us agree that your opinion, however well-informed, is only personally held beliefs, ideas, and judgments that don't require you to have any knowledge or experience in the subject matter you are weighing in on. While your perspective is the result of lived experience, making it something far more valuable than your opinion. However, we're going deeper now. Perception is what you interpret through your perspective. It is your understanding of a given situation, person, or an object, and the meaning you assign to any given stimulus. It's not the same as data collection. Instead, writes New York Times opinion columnist David Brooks, perception is a creative act. You take what you've experienced during the whole course of your life, the models you've stored up in your head, and you apply them to help you interpret all the ambiguous data your senses pick up, to help you discern what really matters in a situation, what you desire, what you find admirable, and what you find contemptible. Finally, a mindset is a broader and more entrenched set of beliefs that influence our view of the world around us. Mindset determines our approach to learning and growth, while attitude, perspective, and perception influence our day-to-day reactions and interactions. According to WeWork, once the most valuable startup in the world before work from home bankrupted it, a growth mindset is all about the attitudes with which a person faces challenges, how they process failures, and how they adapt and evolve as a result. I prompted ChatGPT, there's a phrase I didn't think I'd utter, to give an example to help us understand here. This is what I got. Consider a situation where a group of people is discussing a controversial political issue such as climate change. Attitude. One person in the group may have a positive attitude toward climate change policies, believing they are essential for the environment. Perspective. Another individual might offer a different perspective based on their experience, arguing that the economic impact of such policies is too high and would lead to job losses. A third person, opinion. A third person might express a strong opinion that climate change is a hoax based on their personal beliefs and their sources of information. Perception. Another person, someone else, might perceive climate change as a distant problem, thinking it won't affect their life. Mindset. Lastly, an individual with a proactive mindset may view the discussion as an opportunity to find common ground, fostering constructive dialogue for potential solutions. Maybe I should have asked ChatGPT to write this sermon. Which would you rather have? Dear Lord, I hope you go for the proactive mindset. This approach is one of the reasons I think that most of us became UUs. I asked Quora, a social question and answer website, what attitude is everything meant. One respondent, Steven Sapato, a personal coach who has studied relationships for over 20 years and has done seminars and written books on relationships, writes this: attitude is not everything. Having a positive attitude will help you to do things better than a negative attitude, but along with attitude, there is also actions versus reactions. There is understanding, there's learning and growth. Having the right attitude will help in most situations. Having a great attitude will draw people to you rather than push them away. But attitude only is everything when combined with everything else. Drive, determination, goals, dreams, action, all help to make a great attitude. He's talking about having a proactive growth mindset. What is the difference that a proactive mindset makes in our lives? Harsha Bogle, an Indian cricket commentator and journalist, talks about the difference between attitude in achieving excellence rather than being extremely talented. In the Australian Army, he says, when they build an elite core team, they pick the people who have failed and bounced back. He says that talent breeds ego and fails to prepare the talented for failure, while a proactive growth mindset pushes through obstacles with a passionate work ethic. Has anyone here ever flown a plane? Okay, keep me honest. When in straight and level flight at a density altitude of around 10,000 feet, the attitude indicator reads an attitude of 5 degrees nose up. It's my understanding that most airplanes require a positive angle of attack to generate lift. Accurate so far? Okay, I was looking for something like that, great. Then let's continue with our flying analogy. An Indeed article, Chasing the Needle, by Dan Flack, explains there are 2 kinds of instruments in an aircraft: performance instruments, such as the altimeter and the airspeed indicator, that measure what the aircraft is doing, and control instruments, such as attitude indicator and power instruments, which pilots make input. Concentrating on the performance instruments while failing to pay attention to the control instruments yields erratic results in which altitude and airspeed change greatly. Fixation on the performance instruments and making changes solely based on them is a concept called chasing the needles. Consistent flying depends on a cross-check between both sets of instruments. If there is a variance in airspeed or altitude, look at the power and attitude, make a specific adjustment, and then go back to the performance instruments to monitor the results. Lather, rinse, repeat, he says. Interesting. Focusing too much on outcomes leads to a bumpy ride, while keeping a conscious eye on your attitude and the process prevents erratic behavior. Now, to the point of this reflection. A spiritual attitude is how we orient our awareness of emergent spiritual patterns. These patterns appear within ourselves, our communities, and our world. They influence the understanding of our purpose in life. These attitudes define our ability and responsibility to live as much as possible with spiritual integrity, compassion, and courage as we journey together. Take courage, because it's going to get a bit darker here before I bring it back to the light. Business coach Scott Jeffries, living in the foothills of the Catskill Mountains in upstate New York, reminds his clients that given what scientific studies and psychology have shown about the role of the unconscious in human behavior, we're not aware of what's motivating most of our actions, thoughts, and decisions. It's hidden in what psychologist Carl Jung called the shadow. All the unowned and unrecognized stuff in your psyche finds a way of expressing itself, whether you want it to or not. Follow the thread here, because the next part is truly scary. He says, the human mind's capacity for self-deception is infinite. People who believe in pure goodness are capable of the most unscrupulous evils. The Crusades, the Spanish Inquisition, American slave trade, manifest destiny, the Holocaust. So there is much that directs our attitudes of which we are entirely unaware. Like Theoden in The Lord of the Rings, we too ask, so much death. What can man do against so much reckless hate? But like Aragorn, we can answer, ride out with me. This has been a painful personal struggle for me. Because if I say to myself, I wish to take the moral high ground, to be right, and to see myself as a good person, is this an opinion, a perception, a perspective, an attitude, or a mindset? What qualifies me, given what I know about the unconscious, to make these statements about myself? If I wave a banner, don a t-shirt, and attend a rally, share hopeful messages online, donate generously to my congregation. By the way, we're still in our, you know where that's going. And freely give of my time and talent in building up communities based on principles of dignity, equity, justice, and compassion. Am I not that good person? If I take the good person mindset, I am creating in myself the perception that I am righteous in what I say and do. Where I inevitably fail, I will then interpret those failures through my good person perspective, often ignoring my bad behavior altogether, so that it does not inform my conscience in the least. Since a good person doesn't do those things, after all, my heart was in the right place. It must have been the evils of social media algorithms, AI-powered systems, a rotten society, or some bad actors which have forced these evils upon me. The algorithm made me do it? How do you explain the poor behavior of those people with whom you disagree? It's easy and comfortable for liberals to condemn the actions of the convicted January 6th perpetrators who used the excuses provided by Trump about an unfounded stolen election to do what they already wanted to do. Hang on, because I'm not talking politics. Let's go deeper. The anger, fear, and frustration of a population with a religiously persecuted mindset, who, by the way, geographically controls a larger portion of the electoral map, containing our food supply, oil and gas industry, mining and mineral processing, chemical production, etc., increasingly felt ignored and degraded by Washington political elites making decisions at a global scale that consistently hurt their local towns for decades. Having a good person mindset results in a pattern of indifference to their plight, which fuels the era of Trump and the resurgence of nationalism in America. This is a spiritual problem. As long as it serves my favorite causes, damn the consequences. If you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs, right? Well, with two allies engaged in active wars with increased involvement from the US, expect more divisions over war and identity politics in 2024. An unfortunate election season. Speaking of damning consequences, I'm here to remind you, as of March 2023, costs of war, a project of Brown University's Watson Institute of International and Public Affairs, estimated that the global war on terror cost over $8 trillion, 38 million war refugees and displaced persons, and 940,000 direct deaths, 370,000 or 39% civilians, 75,000 US service members, 7,500, 8,200 US contractors. This next fact brings me to tears. At least 4 times as many active duty personnel and more veterans of post 9/11 conflicts have died of suicide than in combat. 4 times. Already, the Israeli-Hamas war began with 1,139 civilian deaths, has claimed over 20,000 Palestinian lives, mostly children and women. It is abundantly clear to me that dehumanizing one's opposition irrevocably leads to tragedy and the massive loss of innocent lives. The spiritual growth mindset requires us to humanize in the face of threats, harm, and tragedy. Director Jonathan Glazer's latest film, The Zone of Interest, unthinkably portrays Holocaust perpetrators as ordinary people with recognizable motives, while addressing our human capacity for barbarism. In this fictional drama, the commandant of Auschwitz, Rudolf Höss, and his wife Hedwig strive to build a dream life for their family in a house and garden adjacent to the camp. Why do this? Why humanize the perpetrators of the Holocaust? This is a unique approach long advocated by several famous Holocaust survivors, by the way. New York Times reviewer Giles Harvey suggested that it asks the uncomfortable question, could I have participated in this? Would I allow this to happen? Could my desire to live the good life allow me to pay no heed to the consequences? Jonathan Glazer's humanizing work in The Zone of Influence is in dark contrast with the works of Spielberg in Schindler's List, Roberto Benigni's Life is Beautiful, and Roman Polanski's The Pianist, whose Holocaust victim portraits and graphic scenes are used to justify actions in the current conflict, which Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu characterized as a struggle between the children of light and the children of darkness. In sharp contrast to this mindset, we're going to take a turn here. Taylor Minsberg of New York Times reports on the students of the Hand in Hand schools, 6 bilingual institutions in Israel, a mix of Jews and Arabs, who are taught the proposition that Israelis and Palestinians can live and learn together in peace. Haya Saleh, a Palestinian citizen of Israel and the third grader's Arab-speaking teacher, there are 2 in each, Israeli and Hebrew and Arab-speaking teacher, said this to her students: "We might have different languages, religions, and cultures, but we choose to be here together. While hard-right Israeli and Hamas leaders vow to destroy each other, these educators believe they have created a model of honoring one another's traumas, experiences, and histories that can be replicated across the region. One student at the Jerusalem school said in Arabic, 'We need to be friends with each other and not fight.' Another Arab-speaking student, 'Even older people and children can accept each other so we can be safe.' From the mouths of babes who were taught a mindset of peace and coexistence. A few weeks ago, I visited the World War II Museum in New Orleans. I was alarmed at how much I had forgotten the unspeakable acts of hatred and the heroic acts of self-sacrifice and valor. You know the saying about those who do not learn from history. They're doomed to repeat it. With the prevalence of misinformation and disinformation in our public discourse, the likelihood of history repeating only increases. Yesterday was Holocaust Memorial Day, particularly relevant this year. Many of you followed the controversy this past fall over the handling of anti-Semitic speech during protests at colleges and universities across the country. The presidents of Penn State and Harvard resigned over the firestorm resulting from statements they made to Congress in defense of free speech. Allow me to read what New York Times opinion columnist David Friend wrote of Harvard's initial support for its president in his piece titled, "What the University Presidents Got Right and Wrong About Anti-Semitic Speech." He writes, "The best, clearest plan for reform I've seen comes from Harvard's own Steven Pinker, a psychologist and I add a liberal. He writes that campuses should enact clear and coherent free speech policies. They should adopt a posture of institutional neutrality on public controversy. Universities are forums, not protagonists. They should end hecklers' vetoes, building takeovers, classroom invasions, intimidations, blockades, and assaults. But reform can't be confined to policies. It also has to apply to cultures. As Pinker notes, that means disempowering a diversity, equity, and inclusion apparatus that is itself too often an engine of censorship and extreme political bias, which I'll also add, leads to some unconstitutional behavior. Most important, Universities need to take affirmative steps to embrace greater viewpoint diversity. Ideological monocultures breed groupthink, intolerance, and oppression. Universities must absorb the fundamental truth that the best answer to bad speech is better speech, not censorship. Recently, I watched and listened to a video, he writes, of a Jewish student's emotional confrontation with pro-Palestinian demonstrators at Columbia University. Her voice shakes, and there's no doubt that it was hard for her to speak. I'd urge you to listen to the entire thing, he writes. She seeks a genuine and real conversation, but also tells her audience exactly what it means to her when she hears terms like Zionist dogs. Confronting hatred with courageous speech is far better than confronting hatred with censorship. It is obviously important to protect students from harassment. He says, I'm glad the Department of Education is opening numerous Title VI investigations, including Harvard, in response to reports of campus harassment. But do not protect students from speech. Let them grow up and engage with the most vile of ideas. The answer to campus hypocrisy isn't more censorship. It's true liberty. Without that liberty, the hypocrisy will reign for decades more. That seems to mirror some of our own concerns, and they apply to us, don't they? Now, I'm coming to my conclusion. This only compounds the problem I presented at the start. When I read further about ideological monocultures, my heart sank. Am I contributing to the problem by supporting groupthink, intolerance, and oppression? I joined a UU congregation in opposition to these forces within me. And yet, my spiritual journey presses me on to support progressive causes and stay safely within my ideological monoculture. What bothers me most about this kind of self-separation is the persistent ideological divide between rational people that leads to violent speech, eventually violent separation, and God's forbid, violent confrontation. Indeed, what can man do against so much reckless hate? Ride out with me. Western democracy thrives on self-awareness, self-correction, and humility in accepting reality with diverse perspectives and attitudes. And we must maintain it with our proactive spiritual growth mindset of deep belief in the dignity and worthiness of every person. Here's what I've come to. I will always listen and understand, but I will refuse to participate or engage in discussions that include the violence of name-calling, fear-mongering, and the demonization and dehumanization of ideological opposites. Case in point, the United Methodists are no longer united. The largest schism of our time, an entire Christian denomination splintered by attitudes toward progressive causes and mistrust in central governance. I dare ask, is this our future? Our own congregation is embroiled in controversy over the evolution of our Article 2 principles and sources. Like the Methodists and the country at large, every religion is facing this. We now face a crisis of authority involving damaged institutional trust, and for some, a belief that the search for truth is falling to the will to power. Are we not a liberal religious organization offering a home for diversity in thought? I've read the heated rhetoric over the Article 2 revisions, the Gadfly papers, and the ministerial eviction of Dr. Kate Rode and others, when neighborly speech among you use, arguably one of the most tolerant groups in the country, into public shaming, and if it descends into public shaming and name-calling, while compassion and understanding depart, I'm left with a hole in my heart for the missing and silenced voices of my community. What is the proactive growth mindset that will keep us on the path of unity to embrace and celebrate diversity with open-minded acceptance? I suggest that we enliven that same spirit that drives our eager appreciation of the universal truths accepted in our celebrated Article 2 sources. Many paths, one love. This could be our free will decision. I don't believe we get many of them. To listen to each other with compassion and lay down our clubs and pitchforks. We do well to remember that. We do better to continue in open dialogue with honest inquiry from all sides, not tied to specific outcomes. Recalling that we don't live in a world of ideals, we live in a world of people. And people need care, connection, and kindness, first, last, and always. None of us came here to convert or be converted to any particular cause, but to respect each other's boundaries with a gentle invitation to grow together. I once believed that being a good and righteous person was most important. I once thought attitude was everything. But I discovered that a mental posture is only part of a mindset of growth and proactive loving kindness that builds and maintains deep connections before debating over reason, truth, and method. Thank you for listening.